Welcome back to Deep Mara Academy. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating story, the business life cycle of BrewDog PLC. We're going to look at its origins, its pretty wild growth strategies, and, well, the big challenges that came later. It's an absolutely classic case study.
All right, so we're going to break this down into 5 key parts. We'll start with their punk foundation, then get into how they financed everything with equity for punks. After that, we'll look at their peak growth, the financial and cultural strain that followed, and finally, the founder departures and what happened next. It's a chronological journey, so it should be easy to follow along.
Okay, let's kick things off at the very beginning. BrewDog pops up back in 2007, founded by James Watt and Martin Dickie. And their whole idea? It was basically a rebellion against what they saw as a super stagnant, kind of boring UK beer scene.
And man, their early growth was just explosive. You've got these 2 guys, both just 24 years old, starting this thing in 2007. And get this, within a single year, they're Scotland's biggest independent brewery. A year! Soon they're exporting all over the world, and by 2009, they're not just making beer, they're selling it in their very first pub. Just a crazy fast start.
You know, their whole mission, right from their own mouths, was to make everyone else as obsessed with great craft beer as they were. They looked at the UK market and saw a sea of, and I'm quoting here, industrially brewed lagers and stuffy ales. So this whole anti-establishment punk thing, it wasn't just some catchy slogan. It was everything. It was the absolute core of their brand.
So if you're going to grow that fast, you need cash, and lots of it. But instead of going to the big banks, BrewDog did something different. Something they called equity for punks, which was a whole new way of looking at corporate finance.
So what was equity for punks? Well, it was basically a massive crowdfunding plan they launched back in 2009. Here's how it worked. They offered shares in the company directly to their fans, so you, the customer, could actually buy a piece of BrewDog. The investors, who they called punks, got cool perks like discounts at their bars, and all that cash they raised, it went straight into funding their expansion. It was brilliant, really. You're not just getting money, you're building an army of fans who are literally invested in your success. And did people buy in? Oh, yeah. The response was huge. We're talking about a community of around 220,000 individual investors. That's a massive number of people putting their own money behind this punk idea. And the total amount raised from all these people? Over £100 million. 100 million. That money became the rocket fuel for their massive expansion, not just in the UK, but all over the world. It was a complete game changer.
Okay, this brings us to the next chapter, peak growth and marketing. This is where the story gets really wild. We're talking about their massive expansion, how they hit a £1 billion valuation, and their, well, let's call it a unique marketing strategy. BrewDog's marketing playbook was pretty simple. Don't play by the rules. They totally skipped traditional ads, no billboards, no magazine spreads. Their whole game was to get free press by pulling off insane publicity stunts. We're talking driving a tank through Camden, throwing stuffed fat cats from a helicopter. They even packaged a super strong beer inside a taxidermied squirrel. It was all about being loud and getting noticed. And you know what? It worked. These stunts got them a ton of media coverage. I mean, newspapers and TV shows couldn't get enough of it, and that was the whole point. They built this massive brand recognition without spending a fortune on ad campaigns. But then, in 2017, something big changed. A major U.S. private equity firm, TSG Consumer Partners, bought a 22% piece of the company. This was huge. Suddenly, the anti-establishment BrewDog was valued at about £1 billion. $1 billion. And that deal gave them a massive pile of cash to expand even more.
Okay, but after that incredible peak, well, the cracks started to show. From 2020 onwards, the company started running into some really serious problems, both with its money and its internal culture. This is where things get complicated. Just look at the numbers. We're seeing 5 years in a row of pre-tax losses, adding up to about £148 million lost. And while that was happening, their revenue just kind of flatlined. So they had a big slice of the market, but they just weren't making any profit from it. That's a huge red flag. So to make things look a bit better, the company started talking about something called adjusted EBITDA. It's a financial metric, but it's not a standard one, and by using it, they could say they made a £7.5 million profit in 2024. But, and this is a big but, that's only because they left out huge costs like the money they had to pay on their debts. It definitely painted a rosier picture than reality. And this is where you start to see a major clash. The brand promised punk, anti-establishment, community-owned. But the reality? They were part-owned by private equity, taking out high-interest loans, they dropped their commitment to pay the real living wage, and accusations started flying about a culture of fear inside the company. It was a tough look.
All that financial pressure eventually caught up with them, and they had to start shrinking. They closed UK bars, including the very first one in Aberdeen. They had to cut jobs. They even shut down their distillery. And to make matters worse, thousands of pubs stopped selling their beer because customers were choosing other brands. The empire was starting to contract.
And that leads us to our final section, founder departures and aftermath. This is all about the collapse of the original leadership and what that means for BrewDog's future, which, to put it mildly, is pretty uncertain. The leadership just fell apart, and it happened fast. In May 2024, James Watt, the CEO for 17 years, steps down. Just over a year later, the other co-founder, Martin Dickie, is gone completely. Then there was more chaos with the leadership that followed. Suddenly, the two guys who started it all were gone, right when the company needed them most.
With all this financial trouble and no founders at the helm, the company has officially been put up for sale. And as you can probably guess, reports are saying the price tag is going to be way, way lower than that peak of £1 billion back in 2017.
So this begs a really big question, right? What happens to those 220,000 equity punks, the regular people who invested their own money? If the company sells for a fraction of its former value, there's absolutely no guarantee they'll get their original investment back. So let's just wrap up the main points. BrewDog's crowdfunding was genius. It created this massive growth powered by its own fans. But their whole punk identity started to clash with being a huge corporation. The aggressive growth, paid for with expensive debt, just wasn't sustainable. And finally, they were the cool new kids for a while, but the competition caught up and their edge started to fade. At the end of the day, the BrewDog story is a textbook example of a disruptor brand's life cycle. From kicking down the door to maybe getting sold off. It really shines a light on that massive tension between having a rebellious, cool ideology and the cold, hard realities of running a giant company. Thank you for listening, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. If you derived value from our content, please consider sharing it with the world. Goodbye, and continue learning.